Welcome to the Big Story Debate. I'm Tamanna Inamdar. Now, UPI is undeniably one of the most successful tools deployed by the Indian government to boost digital payments. The numbers are astonishing. Just in April, UPI transactions crossed 19 lakh crore rupees in terms of value. The number of transactions crossed 1,330 crores. This is 50% more than a year ago, just to put it into perspective. So what's the problem and what's the debate, you must be wondering? Well, the concern for the industry is that UPI continues to be free. Merchants pay nothing on these transactions when compared to credit card payments and other methods. This means the UPI pie is largely dominated by Google and PhonePe, who between them enjoy over 90% market share. Paytm's recent miseries have only added to this. The question now is, if you continue to keep this vital service free for merchants and eventually customers, can smaller players even survive? Won't you end up then with large players dominating because they simply have deeper pockets? To debate this, I'm joined today by two speakers, Deepak Shenoy, founder Capital Mind, and Shinjini Kumar, co-founder Salt and MySalt app. Of course, have opposing views on the core debate, but to set the context for this debate and joining in is my colleague Vishwanath Nair, who's starting with some exclusive details about how this is also a point of discussion within the NPCI. Now, Vishu, I found this interesting because the government of India and finance minister is very clear. We will not charge UPI. Even so, NPCI, the body which oversees the whole digital platform and the digital payments piece, consistently is concerned about the fact that can this be sustained free?
Yeah, so let me take you back a few years. November of 2020, that's when NPCI comes out with this advisory, sort of a note that we are looking at a market cap structure because the UPI then and today is controlled by two large apps. The next largest app, Paytm, is significantly behind.
Just one sec. When you say market cap structure, you mean that you can only have a certain number of subscribers by market cap. So there's a ceiling to how much you can grow.
So that ceiling proposed by the NPCI was 30%. So you cannot have more, you cannot account for more than 30% of the entire transaction volume on any given day. Now that rule, of course, at that point in time was criticized heavily simply because it's just not possible to have a dynamic sort of cap on transactions, because if a customer is paying, you can't tell them, no, you can't pay with my app because I have hit my cap, you go someplace else. Anyway, so that conversation was more or less a non-starter. Now we are in 2024. That market cap is nowhere to be seen. It was at some point in time, the discussion was that maybe December 2024 we introduce these caps. That hasn't happened. Market believes that this is postponed indefinitely. Now, what does that mean? Essentially, UPI at the current stage is a duopoly. As you mentioned, Google Pay and PhonePe control about 90% of all volumes. So they account for most of the UPI transactions. The next largest player and probably the ones after that are not even close to these two apps to pose any kind of serious competition. If you introduce charges now, then that becomes a problem because people will just stop using it, or people will have some kind of hesitation towards paying for these services, and that becomes a problem. UPI companies, on the other hand, people who support UPI transactions behind your Google Pay and PhonePe, behind your banks, they have a slightly different view. What they point out is that a large portion of the transaction value that is happening right now, remember value, not volume, the large part of the transaction value is coming from your larger merchants. Who are these large merchants? Large merchants with 20 lakh or above annual revenue. These account for nearly 68%, as of April's count, 68% of the 19 point something lakh crore that we saw. Of that, I think merchant payments is about 5.5 lakh crore. 68% of that comes just from these large merchants. So essentially, any payment that is 2,000 rupees or above accounts for that part of the payments pie. And that's why they say that if you're introducing a zero MDR regime to boost UPI acceptance, then your large merchant should not enjoy the same benefits that your smaller shop owner is.
Okay, essentially, if someone is buying an expensive gadget from a showroom, why should that showroom owner enjoy the same thing as your roadside vendor?
Yeah.
to put it simply.
Simply, yes.
All right. So that sort of lays the context of why this is a debate right now. And I want to start with the very simple question posed to both our speakers today, Deepak Shenoy and Shinjini Kumar. Is the duopoly such a big concern? Because that's the starting point of this conversation, right? If you don't charge for UPI, smaller players can't come in, only those with deeper pockets, hence your Google Pay and Phone Pay are sitting on top of that. Is that a big problem? Let me start with Shinjini Kumar.
I don't know if that's the way to start looking at this problem or addressing it, because you look at Master and Visa and you look at Amex. So we are talking about the global world of payments, and we are talking about much larger volumes and much larger economies. Because when you build these things at scale, that's when you begin to solve a certain type of problems which relate to, let's say, security, data, et cetera, et cetera. So there is a very clear agenda that the government also specifies, that they want to promote what they call indigenous payments. And we'll talk about it later, but right now I'll just stop short of saying that just look at how payments have evolved or carried on in the world, and we already have examples of seeing how Master, Visa or Amex have worked through this situation, and still you have Stripe, and you have space for new people coming in and building new type of product or new technologies. So there will be disruptions in the market, there will be newer players, but whether it is for the government to start looking at the problem from that lens is not something that I'm convinced of.
Okay, so just duopoly should not be an issue, but I just, as a starting point, Deepak, I want to come to this core issue, that aren't you crowding out smaller players if you keep something free, which essentially costs money? At the end of the day, it's a cost of customer acquisition. It's not as if there are no charges to the system. The merchant doesn't pay, and hence the customer doesn't pay to use UPI, but it's not like it doesn't cost anything.
So, Tamanna, here's my thing. The customer has never paid to take out cash from a bank or an ATM by regulation. The customer has not been, RBI has actually removed, if you look at the history of payments, RBI has removed payment charges from almost every interperson or merchant to person payment instrument available. From ATMs, there's be a certain amount of free transactions in ATMs. There is checks, which all RBI with NPCI built an infrastructure that today in India you can give checks from anywhere, depositable anywhere else in the country for free. There is no charge for outstation checks anymore and all that stuff. RBI has forcibly made also RTGS free, NEFT free. They're available 24/7. They also cost money to banks and to all the players in this ecosystem who are actually using this, but nobody asks that you should charge those customers for using NEFT and all that stuff. I think the RBI has been very clear. What happens because of the availability of such easy to pay systems is the float inside of banks increases. So the float has actually increased quite tremendously. Let me give you the numbers. Before 2018, we were looking at about 300,000 crores per month withdrawn from ATMs. This was growing quite rapidly as money supply has grown across the board. Since UPI has taken off after that, about 2017, 2018 onwards, today, this is of Feb 2024 data, shows us that withdrawals from ATMs adds up to 250,000 crores. We've actually seen this decline or stay flat in a time when money supply has increased to a point where it's gone up roughly 45-50%. UPI transactions have gone up maybe 400 or 500%. Essentially, people are using ATMs a lot less. It costs a lot less now for a bank to keep its ATM infrastructure going simply because UPI is useful. This cost saving is effectively something that is hitting a bank's bottom line. Why should a customer pay for this when banks are actually seeing benefits?
So your point is that the benefit outstrips whatever cost the bank incurs. So there's nothing really to cry about. Simply put, yeah, Shinjini, your response to that?
no product works if the incentives are not aligned for all participants. So again, I'll go back to the existing, card structure. So consumer benefits because I can buy something without having cash in my pocket. Merchant benefits because they can sell to a consumer who otherwise wouldn't buy. And banks benefit because there is customer acquisition without them having to spend for that customer. And there is credit development. And so, and the schemes benefit because they're providing the service and they're charging you for it. If you apply the similar situation to UPI, everybody is benefiting in their own way, right? Government is benefiting because cost of printing currency becomes less. User is benefiting, merchant is benefiting. But when everybody is benefiting, the appropriation of that benefit has to be done in a way that makes sense to everybody, because otherwise, if you are just going to say that we will do it based on certain assumptions about 2,000 rupees and below or 10,000 rupees and above or some such things, then you are creating further distortion in a place where price discovery has already not happened. So in my view, just understanding who is benefiting from this, how much, and accordingly creating an incentive structure or allowing an incentive structure to emerge is the way for this to happen. And India is two countries. We always have to remember that the UPI, the retail transaction that we are all talking about, this major, transaction volume increase is coming from places where the demand is inelastic. So when you buy your groceries, when you go to the temple, when you buy your nariyal, all the use cases that we constantly cite about, these are things that people would anyway do, and these are things that merchants would anyway sell. So actually, you cannot create an artificial incentive for those people to pay MDR. Okay, they will not do it. But if you go into the mall and a person is buying something which they would otherwise not buy, it's an elastic demand. There it is easier to impose a charge, right? But there you are now competing with the MDR which exists on your credit card, where you don't have to, your bank account doesn't immediately get debited vis-a-vis a UPI where your bank account immediately gets debited. So the consumer's mindset and the choice that the consumer will make will be very different in that space where demand is elastic versus where demand is inelastic, and various other factors, right? There is also this power asymmetry between the user and the merchant. So it's not always the same. It's not always the same in every segment, etc. So this is a market, and we are talking about transactions which cover a very broad spectrum of market. Yeah. My only submission is that it cannot be made free on a whim, or it cannot be made charged on a whim. It has to be a little bit more studied as a process.
Right. I want to take the point that Deepak was making a little earlier about the float. Now, Deepak, the core of that argument assumes that it's only banks who are in this picture. But at the end of the day, UPI as a product and this market where people use it very freely was not actually built by banks. It was your third-party applications. It was your service providers who ended up putting those QR codes. I mean, sure, banks back it all, but these services are available in every corner because a third-party entity at any given time is hunting for those customers and is incentivizing those customers. So when we're talking about charges over UPI, don't you think that the question also becomes that how do you incentivize the rest of this ecosystem outside of the banks? I have no sympathy for the banks, but there are so many other players involved who ensure that these payments do go through.
So yes, I think two layers of things. Nobody does business without understanding the landscape. The landscape and the Payments Act after 2016 was actually modified to say UPI will not be charged. So, I mean, people are pretty aware of what is happening over here. So they're not getting into this saying, oh, well, you know what, we've done this for 5 years, please support us now, now that we've done this for 5 years. They knew it was going to be free. Taking it off free is a big change. The reason it got popular was because it's free. And the players, when they walked in with the thought process that this would be free. Now, how can you earn money out of something that's free? Answer, one of the things Shinjini mentioned was credit. Credit does pay, and you can use credit on top of UPI in different ways. And you could set up an infrastructure that helps you benefit from that. The second one is a layer of merchant payments. Now, we as a company use UPI. We actually pay an intermediary for this charge as a small flat fee, but whatever it is, that intermediary gets paid by us, regardless of whether UPI requires to be free or not. We know that a lot of merchants get merchant services. If you're in a shop and you're paying getting hundreds of payments from customers using UPI. You want some software to actually tell you which customer paid for who. You will pay for this software, sometimes as an MDR, sometimes as just a transaction fee, but whatever it is, the intermediary who's actually helping you settle these transactions will get paid as part of this process. There is also an overnight credit process sometimes because the money goes and sits in an escrow account for a day before it is transitioned on to the merchant, and the merchant sometimes will even pay for credit that is for that 1 or 2 days, which they get the money before the money is actually released from escrow. There are many ways that all of these systems are currently already paying people for. It's just not an MDR. I think MDR is a very lousy way to pay.
Okay, so I get your point. So you're saying MDR is a lousy way. There are a lot of allied services on top that you can add that pay. But then let's go back to the basic question, Deepak. If customer acquisition costs continue, then and you have no way to actually clearly get paid for that essential service, you're going to be stuck with this duopoly. New companies are not going to come in. They're not going to spend money to acquire more customers. Eventually, does it end up harming the idea of spreading digital payments far and wide?
You're seeing the ads on TV now, the one in the IPL and so on. There is another UPI player who's advertising that my UPI is better than somebody else's. And there's always, there are people willing to put in money behind this because there's an ecosystem of users that is willing to use your product. The banks should be, they're the direct beneficiaries, and anyone with a banking license can actually put a QR code based app payment for their customers for free, and people can use it on a regular basis. I have multiple bank accounts. I link them with all of these service providers. I use direct bank apps as well to pay using UPI. I think the ecosystem is much bigger than all of this. Yes, two of the players have spent a lot of money acquiring customers and getting people to use them. But I think that's harmed the ecosystem in the way that says UPI should be not a product that says use Paytm or Google Pay or Phone Pay. Use UPI. You can use whatever app you have, whatever bank app you have, and directly use it. It should be, it will eventually be an ecosystem where it doesn't matter what app you have. You just use a QR code. Whatever app you have, you can use it. And if some UPI player wants to provide cashbacks on it, so be it. Some other UPI player wants to help you get better credit on it, so be it. But I think that is where eventually we're going to move to. The fact that we are a duopoly does not, or it's a duopoly is only on the, by the way, on the payment side. On the merchant side, it's not a duopoly in any meaningful form. There's a lot of other players that are coming in. On the merchant side, they get paid also. I think the distress is in the fact that of the merchant payments, which are roughly 20 to 25% of overall UPI payments, a significant percentage comes from larger merchants, which I believe they're anyway paying for. Many of them are already. Some of them aren't, like my neighborhood shop, which may actually be getting a bunch of orders about 2,000 rupees. But that person, the minute you introduce 1 rupee charge on UPI for himself, is likely to say, I won't take it. Anybody else who's already taking credit cards is probably already willing to pay for this larger MDR service. But I think growing the market from free, and believe me, all of the internet protocols that we've ever built, all our products on, which have made things so awesome, have actually come out of free, right? So most of these internet protocols, the reason why you're able to translate ndtvprofit.com into some server which serves this data and all of that stuff, everything has been free. A lot of the internet has actually been built on top of free, and people have built services eventually on top. But you don't pay for email. You can if you want to, but you don't, for the most part, pay for email anymore. Google searches are free. Why? They use it to subsidize their other products. Makes Google searches chargeable, and you will find things change very dramatically in terms of usage. I think free is not a de-innovator in that concept. It is just a mechanism.
Shinji, I want to pose this question to you. So, since this zero MDR regime has come up, one of the participants in this entire ecosystem, the government, has been giving some form of a subsidy to the ecosystem in the form of maybe 1,500 to about, I think, 1,400, 1,500 crore, something they pay every year to incentivize the system because they are not charging MDR. Having said that, if you just do a bit of a back of the envelope sort of math, the RBI in its papers says that about 0.25% is the total cost for any UPI transaction to go through. And if you take 19,36,000 crore something worth of UPI transactions, that adds up to significant, a couple of thousand crores at least, I think about 3,000 or 4,000 crore worth of spending that happens on ensuring that those transactions go through. The government's 1,500 crore is probably just accounting for a small portion of that. Do you think maybe then the government should sort of open its wallet a little wider?
I surely think that the government is the largest saver in this system. I mean, when I say government, I mean RBI plus government, because cost of printing currency is divided between the two organizations depending upon denomination. So, and the smaller the value of currency, the higher the proportionate cost of printing, right? Now, the payment revolution has been very, very interesting because you have been able to save a lot of the small currency printing costs. We have still not been able to save the high currency, high value currency printing costs, because there the demand for currency is more as a store of value and for other purposes, which I think is a different debate altogether. But when it comes to this UPI versus cash, the UPI versus cash battle is definitely in favor of the government plus RBI plus banking system because of the sheer economics of, how much it costs to print currency, 4 rupees to print a 2,000 rupee note and probably almost 1 rupee to print a 10 rupee note. So the lower the denomination, the higher your cost. So you are actually saving more in that retail space, in that small value transaction space, in addition to various other benefits. I'm not even going there. I'm simply going like to like keeping cash in circulation versus actually, substituting them with digital transactions. So a better understanding of that cost and a much more transparent disclosure. So if you see RBI's Payment Vision 2025, they actually do talk about making available desegregated data. They actually talk about currency in circulation numbers.
Just one question, Shinjini. If RBI and government increase their payment, essentially it's the taxpayer paying, isn't it? At the end of the day, then it comes down to the same thing. That is UPI a social good or a commercial transaction? And then if it's a social good, should it be subsidized?
No, it's not a social good. It's infrastructure. It's infrastructure. Like Deepak just said, it is paid. It's not that it is not paid. The only case that I'm making is that make the payment sound like payment. Don't call it a subsidy. It is not a subsidy. Nobody is being subsidized to run UPI. It's just like running, earlier Deepak gave examples of other systems like check truncation system that RBI built to facilitate, banking system and settlement system. So I really think that the debate needs to be around the fact that who is the beneficiary of UPI and whether that beneficiary is paying for it. And if that beneficiary is paying for it, then so be it. It's a good thing. Because the end consumer, as I said, you have to divide them into two parts. And that end consumer to whom cash is clearly the better alternative, the moment you levy a charge, because that 4 rupees that it costs to print that 2,000 rupee note or the 1 rupee that it costs to print the 10 rupee note is not something that person who's holding the 10 rupee in his pocket is aware of in any case. That's the seigniorage that you live with. And therefore, if you want to substitute that, then it is the seigniorage responsibility and not that user's responsibility. So making him pay for that doesn't make sense. However, go ahead.
No, so if I were to boil this down to the essential question that we're asking today, is there any situation in which you think that UPI should be chargeable? Now, whether it gets passed on to the end consumer or not remains to be seen. But do you think that there is any situation in which there should be a basic charge which perhaps the merchant pays or the bank pays or the platform pays?
Yeah, I think we will hit that situation very soon where UPI will become one more way to pay for large value transactions in addition to your credit card and in addition to cash in the larger stores. And that's where the MDR will probably equalize, or we will have a discovery of a MDR which might be something in between. And that's where the future of high value UPI transactions will depend on. So even today, if you go into some shops in certain cities, and I don't want to name cities, but you will find people taking out wads of cash to buy things, right? And there is a cost to cash that person is incurring, but they don't care. They pay cash. So in the same way, there will be UPI transactions which will be available and people will pay, because maybe your UPI will be safer than credit card. There are enough people.
So high value.
Yeah.
So for high value transactions, in some cases, there should be a charge on UPI. Deepak, the same question to you. Very simple. Yes, no?
Yes, no, in the sense of should MDR be chargeable as a percentage of the amount spent? No. It is like me saying it doesn't cost any more for anybody to transfer bytes worth 19 lakhs versus 19,000 versus 19 rupees. Therefore, I think having a percentage charge is retrograde and it should not be done. But okay, giving you the example of how much the difference is. Yes, the rupee printing cost for the RBI has come down by 300 crores last year. That is 22-23 saw 4,600, 21-22 saw 4,900 crores. That 300 crore rupees was the saving, and that is definitely something, like Shinjini said, should be in a way transferred to the players in the ecosystem. Currently, it only goes to the banks. It does not respect the presence of the other players in the ecosystem, believing that the banks anyway, PhonePe, by the way, is not a source or a destination of any money. They can only work with banks. So in the end, your account needs to be at some bank and they need to work through a bank to facilitate the UPI process. So it is the banks that receive the effective subsidy, even currently, that's being paid by the government, and then also a potential free, when I say subsidy, I think the government classifies it as one.
Okay.
But it's not really one. But
so the banks should pay. Let
the
banks
I think, should pay downstream.
Okay.
RBI should also pay maybe a share, but it should not be a percentage of transaction. It should.
Banks should
In
pay.
fact, that's
Maybe
the
RBI should pay.
opportunity.
Customers should not pay.
So Tamanna, that's the opportunity actually to discover a mechanism that is much more efficient than the MDR-based mechanism that today exists. Because when technology changes, the benefits of that should pass down to everyone, right? And for the government, the cost of printing is not the only cost. The cost of maintaining currency in circulation is the larger cost. So actually, and that cost is incurred by banks as well as by RBI. So that's the point I'm making.
All right. So an interesting debate, and the conclusion is actually not as divergent. The customer should not pay us to pay. In most cases, you don't want people to want to go back to cash. But there has to be some sort of incentive for more and more players to come in and keep this ecosystem alive and kicking. Thank you so much, Shinjini and Deepak, for joining us on the debate today.